So a few days ago, I opened up YouTube and was immediately recommended a video by a YouTuber named Tyler Oliveira, an American investigative journalist, and I use that term very lightly. The video's title reads, "Inside the Rise of Germany's Neo-Nazis," with quotes around the neo-Nazis. Now, I don't know anything about this YouTuber, and a look through some of the videos he makes shows me that I probably wouldn't like them very much. Apparently, some content creators much bigger than myself have also taken issue with his style of journalism, but what I want to talk about today is something completely different. You see, Tyler Oliveira is a YouTuber with, at the time of this recording, almost 7 million subscribers. Now, I take issue with someone spreading Nazi propaganda to possibly millions of people, and I also take issue when said propaganda likes to present itself as if it was neutral journalism just asking all the questions no one wants to ask. So today, I want to dissect many of the points that come up in this video and provide the context that Tyler either doesn't know or doesn't care about, as well as point out the strategies he uses to whitewash much of what he's talking about. And I want to point this out before we continue, that for much of the video, although he'll drop the act later, he talks about immigrants generally, putting them all in the same group, but it's very clear from what he says that he is speaking specifically about Muslims and other Arabs from Middle Eastern countries when he's talking about immigrants. He'll talk about Germans just wanting to stop the Islamization of Germany while showing a video of pro-Palestine protests, for example. What does a pro-Palestine march have to do with Islamization? Is he using Islamization to mean something else? Let's investigate.
In 2023, foreigners made up 15% of Germany's population, but accounted for 41% of all violent crime suspects, with 75% of the victims being Germans.
Now, to start off with, Tyler uses this statistic frequently throughout the video.
And roughly 40% of the crimes are committed by that 14%. Why do you think that is? And is that a reason for concern? Statistics would say that 40% of the crime-ish is being perpetrated by those of immigrant background. Is that a concerning problem to you, or is that overblown?
If I would have to flee my country out of actual fear of being and then put into basically camps and would not be allowed to work.
Sure.
Perhaps I would also search for work, but not so much on the legal side of things. Yeah.
But sexual assault, for instance, wouldn't fall under that category, right?
Oh, no, definitely not.
So let's think for a minute. Where does the source come from? Well, he doesn't provide it, but a quick Google search will show that it comes from the official police criminal statistics of 2023 in Germany. So let's give context to this statistic. Well, first off, this counts only crimes that the police themselves directly record. This means that crimes that fall under terrorism, of which the majority are committed by far-right white Germans, are not counted because the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, or the Verfassungsschutz, deals with that, and not the police. Other crimes that aren't recorded by the police include things like financial crimes and tax fraud. Additionally, the report from the police themselves read that in the last few years, crime rates have started to rise since 2021. Now, I wonder if there was anything that happened in the last 4 years that could cause an increase in crime statistics. Well, off the top of my head, COVID, the war in Ukraine, the genocide in Gaza, and the overall worsening living conditions in Germany. The police even admit to increased inflation being directly linked to a rising rate of violent crime in the report. Now, the report talks about migrants in general. It doesn't separate Muslim migrants from non-Muslim migrants. It might interest Tyler to know that Muslims don't actually make up the most migrants in Germany. Actually, other Europeans do. But not once does Tyler talk to a Ukrainian about their life in Germany, for example. He doesn't talk to anyone about the living conditions of other European immigrants in Germany. No, he only asks about Muslims. But let's ignore everything I've said for now and take what he says at face value. 14% of the population commits 40% of all crimes. Why would that be? Is there anything innate to being an immigrant that makes one a criminal? Or is it the conditions that people live in? I mean, of all the homeless people in Germany, only 32% have a German citizenship. That means the vast majority of them are immigrants who don't have homes, jobs, or other types of support. Do you think being homeless maybe has more to do with them doing crime rather than being an immigrant? What about people who are stateless, of which there are 126,000 people in Germany, 1 in 3 of them born in this country, and 70% from minority groups? You can be stateless for many reasons with no fault of your own, like mistakes in your identification, or being from a country that Germany doesn't recognize, like Palestine. And not having a state means you don't have an identity card. It makes it harder to find somewhere to live, harder to get a job, harder to study in university, to travel, to do anything you need an ID to do. It's like the state completely ignores your existence. Except the tax office, of course. What about the fact that Germans are more likely to report crimes if migrants are the ones committing them? Or the fact that migrants are less likely to report a crime if the person committing the crime against them is German? Or the fact that there is a crime that only migrants can be charged with, that being a violation of migration laws? Or what about racism in the police system itself, meaning more attention is put on immigrants on the street, which of course means more immigrants will be arrested? There are so many holes in this one stupid statistic that Tyler keeps repeating over and over and over again that it completely falls apart if you think about how the statistic was formed in the first place. I swear this is exactly the same as racists in the United States pulling out the black people make up 13% of the population but commit half of the crimes, as if this has anything to do with being innately black. I wanted to spend time on this because, for one, Tyler keeps repeating it, but for two, it becomes increasingly clear throughout the video that while he's asking lots of different people different questions, all of them are meant to lead to one thing. Immigrants, and specifically Muslim and Arab immigrants, commit more crime and don't integrate as well. As for the video itself, it starts off with him interviewing people in a couple different places in Germany. Now, generally speaking, the interviews are fine. He's asking people what they think of the AfD, he's asking immigrants how easy it was to come to Germany. Some of the questions are kind of strange.
Do you think immigrants have an obligation to build and uplift their own community rather than leaving and fleeing to countries like Germany, let's say? Does Germany have an obligation to change and modify themselves to accommodate them, or vice versa? I think many refugees coming here are actually just economic migrants using the term refugee to come here. And
Sometimes.
does Muslim culture integrate well into Germany from what you've seen?
No. It's important to say it's because of German country.
German's fault?
But I wanted to highlight this one moment that I thought was a bit disingenuous. In Berlin, he talks to a student from India and asks him how easy it was for him to move to Germany, to which the guy responds, very easy. Now, this guy just said he was a student. Do you think maybe being accepted into a German university has something to do with him being able to get a visa? That question isn't asked. This is the only person in the video he ever asks how easy it was to come into Germany. If I'm someone who doesn't know anything about immigration, what do you think I'll think about immigration from this interaction? That people can just hop on a plane and come over whenever they feel like it? I would like to point out that this place that he's interviewing people at is Potsdamer Platz, which is close to where a lot of the monuments are that tourists like to visit, as well as being one of the most expensive places in the city. The answer you will receive from people who are living and working in that area, especially from immigrants, will be very different from someone who is living in Neukölln, for example, where many more immigrants living in Berlin stay. It is easier to immigrate if you or your parents have money. That's true for any country. The choice to go to one of the nicest parts of the city to ask a student hanging out how easy it was for him to move to Germany is not representative of the situation that most immigrants find themselves in. The interviews continue for a bit, and then we finally get to an interview where Tyler, now in Thuringia, talks to someone who is openly an AfD supporter. Let's watch the clip in full.
Ich wähle auch die AfD, weil ich habe nichts gegen Ausländer, Gottes Willen. Aber wenn der eigene Deutsche so ausgenutzt wird, ja, okay. Und das ist eben das, ja, da muss ich ein bisschen was dran ändern jetzt hier, weil wir müssen doch an uns denken.
Oh, that seems to be the entire interview. He's not going to ask about how Germans are being exploited. He's not going to ask what about the innocent migrants who are going to be negatively affected by the AfD. Nope, I guess Tyler got what he wanted from that guy. Then he repeats the crime statistics again, but this time adds 41% of violent crime.
As the foreigners that make up 15% of Germany's population account for 41% of violent crime in 2023, although some believe acknowledging these statistics is a gateway to racism and xenophobia.
Now, the report does not say violent crime, it says crime, as in all crime. I don't know if this was a mistake, but I wanted to point this out anyway. Later on, he goes to Dresden to interview people on both sides of a Pegida rally. I'll get to what Pegida is in a moment, but here are some other interesting things that happen. First, he acknowledges that the right-wing rally is playing their new anthem, a song that repeats the line, "Germany is for Germans, foreigners out," but doesn't explain this to his audience. Then he talks to another old lady and doesn't ask any follow-up questions either.
Interview, Deutsch. What are your thoughts on Pegida?
Pegida, genau. Ich gehe zu Pegida.
What are your thoughts on Muslim immigrants in Germany?
Oh, no.
Why?
Nix, also Islam habe ich nichts am Hut. Das wird mir zu hart, das wird mir zu kriminell, braucht man nicht. Braucht eigentlich keiner. Wir sind christlich geprägt und so soll es bleiben.
Okay.
Wir wollen unsere Kultur behalten und nie anders.
Okay, danke.
A cop tells him he likes his videos, totally normal. Then another interview with no follow-up questions with the most honest racist you will ever meet.
The immigrants are in Germany to make Germany an Islamic state. Muslims come from all over the world and say, this is now our land.
Okay.
And it cannot be. Muslims should go away.
The interviews continue with lots of different people, some of which have positive things to say about immigrants and Islam, but these are the people that he targets for follow-up questions. Questions about if Muslims can integrate, if they are compatible with Germany, and others of that sort are constantly asked to people who are counter-protesting the Pegida rally, but nothing is ever asked to be clarified by people who are in support of Pegida. Now, some of you are probably asking yourself, what is Pegida? Pegida stands for Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamization of the West, and it's what it sounds like. Pegida was founded by Lutz Bachmann, who Tyler is about to interview. Now, Bachmann is the founder and chairman of Pegida, which focuses on organizing right-wing, anti-Islam, and anti-Muslim immigration rallies throughout Germany, although they have some branches in different countries around Europe, with notably the UK branch being founded and run by English Defence League founder and far-right activist Tommy Robinson. A survey found that 86% of the far-right nationalist AfD party members supported Pegida, and another 50% of both CDU and SPD members support as well. Now, I can't play the entire interview because it's long and I'm afraid I'll get copyright claimed, but I'll play here some short clips of Lutz explaining himself what Pegida is, and note that anytime Tyler asks a question, it's not for a source, it's not anything that causes any friction, it's just for a way to Lutz to continue talking.
We are fighting 10 years now against islamization, which is taking over all over Europe. But in the meantime, in these 10 years, there came more themes and more themes. We are now fighting against these crazy genderism, and as well, we're fighting for the freedom of speech and stuff like that.
What concerns you about Islam?
You just need to look in the world. And the problem is, it's not just these maybe 10,000 crazy Islamists they are running around. What the problem is, if they behead somebody, the normal Muslim is standing and watching it because he can't do anything because his book, the Quran, tells him it's right, like behead all the unbelievers and stuff like that. So,
Do you think Islam and Western values are compatible?
not at all. So there's a German politician that has been saying in the 60s or 70s, he says, you don't save Calcutta. If you bring whole Calcutta to your country, then your country becomes Calcutta.
I see.
You
So
know
you
what I
think
mean?
their culture will replace German culture?
Exactly. They call it integration, but integration for me is a big lie. Because integration, when you see the word, means that you integrate somebody and he brings a bit of his to your culture. I've got my best man for my wedding is a Turkish guy. He's Muslim. I've got so many friends, black friends from everywhere.
Now, if you'll notice, there are some contradictions in what he says. How can you believe that Islam cannot have a place in Europe and be incompatible with European values, while at the same time having a Muslim friend who is your best man at a wedding? Something here does not make sense.
The head of the Muslim Council in Germany, it's called Ayman Mazyek, this guy. This is basically the highest Muslim in Germany.
Okay.
Himself, he says there's only one Islam.
I looked up this quote that Lutz uses from Ayman Mazyek, but I couldn't find it in English or in German. But what I did find was something else Mazyek said that was criticized by someone I think Lutz would agree with. This article was written by someone who was on a TV panel with both Majek and German Muslim author Kola Mariam Hupsch. The title of the panel was, and remember it because it'll be important later, "Is Islam a Threat to Us Too?" During the panel, Hupsch says, "When I look at ISIS, it's a fanatical ideology that has nothing to do with Islam." And Oliveira, the person writing the article and the person next to them on the panel, notes that Majek also frequently says ISIS and other fundamentalist groups have nothing to do with Islam. Now, Yeggs continues by writing, "As a representative of Islam in Germany, he, as in Majek, declined any and all responsibility." Now, I'm sorry, but what does Ayman Majek, as a German Muslim, have to claim responsibility for when some other people in another country who he clearly doesn't think shares the same beliefs as him does something bad? Did we ask the Pope to accept responsibility when George Bush said he wanted to invade Iraq because God told him to? Yeggs continues to write, "Why do so many Muslims appear on these talk shows when none of all of this apparently has anything to do with their religion? I wonder why. Maybe it has something to do with you naming your panel, 'Is Islam a Threat to Us Too?' Maybe that has something to do with it." What Oliver Yeggs and Lutz Bachmann have in common, and what frankly all racists have in common, is that they view every Muslim as the same, all equally responsible for each other and all equally as extremist as the worst example they can pick out. In the interview, Lutz says he has no problem with anyone's race and that he's just concerned about the Islamization of Europe. Well, first off, his characterization of Muslims is just blatantly false. There is a wide range of Muslims who believe different things, and if someone beheads another person, I'm sure many Muslims would have a problem with that, like Ayman Majek. When asked what concerns him about Islam, he says, "Just look around the world." He keeps repeating things that are not true and holds them to be self-explanatory because he assumes everyone has his racist worldview.
I think Islam is like mid-age ideology. You see, there's no space between government and Quran.
Ironically, by making this claim, he himself is not differentiating between the people who follow the religion and governments that follow the religion, but whatever. Now, he's talking about various different Middle Eastern countries' governments that are linked in various ways to religion, and I could honestly make another 2-hour-long super in-depth history video about this topic alone, and maybe I will in the future, but to keep it as brief as possible, do you think maybe that the prevalence of religion in various countries' governments has more to do with the fact that every time a secular Arab nationalist movement popped up, whether that be in Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, or Palestine, Western countries like the United States deem them to be socialist and harder to exploit, and do everything they can to replace them with someone they think is easier to control, most often religious extremists? It has nothing to do with something that is inherent to Islam or to Arabs, and everything to do with the certain groups that have consistently been brought into power by the Western world as a way of meddling in Middle Eastern politics. There's a perfect story to illustrate this about Lutz Bachmann that Tyler Oliveira also plays into. In an interview with genuinely one of the worst newspapers to ever exist, Bild, Lutz says that he has the idea to create Pegida after he saw a rally of PKK supporters in Germany. Now, what does the PKK have to do with Islamization? Nothing. The PKK, or the Kurdistan Workers' Party, is a militarized national liberation movement created because of the oppression of Kurdish people in Turkey. It has nothing to do with Islamization. In fact, if you go to their Wikipedia page and scroll down just a little bit, you'll see very clearly that one of their main opponents in which they engage in actual armed conflict is ISIS. The PKK has done more to fight Islamic fundamentalism than any racist pseudo-intellectual on a TV panel or Pegida activist. It is extremely telling that Lutz Bachmann saw a rally in support of the PKK, which was probably attended by a lot of Kurdish people living in Germany, and immediately thought he needed to stop the growth of Islamization, because he saw a group of angry people that looked like Arabs. Tyler Oliveira does this as well in this exact video when he talks about Islamization and shows videos of pro-Palestine protests. But the Palestinian liberation movement is not one born out of the need to Islamize the West. He also frequently uses videos captured on New Year's celebration in Berlin, which shows people with fireworks and guns, and it should be clear that Arab people are not the only people who celebrate New Year's. But he chooses these clips to show in his videos of immigrant crime and Islamization. What does people celebrating New Year's have to do with Islamization? To use videos of those protests and those parties as an example of Islamization is something you would do if you weren't just unable to tell the difference between fundamentalists and non-fundamentalist Muslims, but if you were unable to tell the difference between Muslims and Arabs in the first place. Back to the video, he continues by showing clips of both of the rallies, pretty much what you would expect for both of them, before continuing with interviews on the anti-Pegida demo. Now, he briefly interviews 4 people, and there's nothing really to talk about because honestly, he doesn't ask them any deep questions, and they all kind of just say, yeah, we're against them. The majority of them call them fascists or Nazis or something of that sort. Right before these interviews are played, though, Tyler asks Lutz, what do you say to people who call you a racist or a Nazi? And Lutz kind of just goes, yeah, what's the proof? I have a Muslim friend. And then the interview just continues. The editing of the video kind of implies that there isn't any proof, and in turn kind of just makes the anti-Pegida protest look kind of silly. But there is proof. I'm sure Lutz wouldn't consider it to be racist, but comparing people to animals and saying Syrian refugees from the war are invaders is racism. The majority of AfD supporters are also supporters of Pegida. What does it mean when a party that has gone far beyond just using the same rhetoric, but using the same slogans as Nazis, supports you? I'm sure if you were to ask Björn Höcke the exact same questions, he would have the exact same answers. He knows how it looks to openly say racist things, so instead of race, he just says, oh, they're incompatible with our culture and religion. I'm not against them because of their race, I'm just worried about Islamization. But what is Islamization in Europe? I mean, is any European country changing its laws to be more in line with the Quran? No. Is the culture of various different Middle Eastern countries, which, yes, are all different and not just one giant culture, coming and taking over European culture? Well, let's see. Some mosques have probably opened up to meet the demands of religious immigrants, but has that prevented anyone from going to church? No. Do you have to eat what Muslims eat and when Muslims eat? No. Has anything from German culture been taken away? Well, let's see. Nazis in the government? Check. Beer and schnitzels? Check. German music, movies, and books? Check. No, to these people, Islamization is the presence of Arab people, the presence of falafel shops, hearing Arabic as a language, and the scariest of all, Muslims. But let's think for a second. Do Muslims come to other countries with the intent of converting people to their religion? I mean, Christians do that, historically and even today. But what about Muslims? Has their presence convinced people to convert? Actually, if you look at some studies conducted on religious migrants in the Netherlands, the exact opposite has happened. This study reads, existing studies with such a design show that migration initially lowers the religiosity of both Christian and Muslim newcomers in Europe. Subjective religiosity seems to decrease at a faster rate among Muslims than among Christians. Moreover, subjective religiosity shows a steady decrease over time. So, although religiosity is affected in different directions through immigrants' integration into the mainstream versus their co-ethnic communities, the balance weighs in on the mainstream, as the immigrants become less religious over time and therefore more like the secular majority population. We can surprisingly conclude that Muslim religiosity does not stand out, but is subject to the same secularizing force as other religions. A short while after, Tyler interviews a man who says too many Muslims is a poison, and of course doesn't have any follow-up questions for him. But let's talk about poison. Is it poisonous when a Muslim comes to your country and then secularizes and becomes more like you? No. The only way that a Muslim could be poison is if the problem isn't Islam at all. No, it's only poison when people who are different from you come and live in your country. Tyler ends this video asking the viewer what the cost of destroying borders may be. I'm not going to get into that because it's its own hour-long discussion, but I wanted to point out what clips he uses in these final moments. This show is called Attack on Titan, and it follows a society that has built borders to keep man-eating giant monsters out of their city. I think the symbolism is quite on the nose. And that's how the video ends. Now, I'm not claiming that Tyler went to Germany with the explicit intent of making Nazi propaganda, and honestly, I believe that he probably thinks this was a fair and balanced video about both sides of the conflict. But whether he did it intentionally or not, throughout the video he lets racists speak uninterrupted, doesn't question any of their beliefs, all the while asking other people who are more pro-immigration what they think about Muslims while quoting bullshit crime statistics. And then, when it comes to interviews on both sides, he speaks with the leader of an anti-Muslim organization while not making any effort to interview someone of the same level on the other side. I mean, honestly, this guy has millions of subscribers. I'm sure if he wanted to, he could have reached out to Ayman Majek. If you were someone who doesn't have an opinion or any background information, it's clear what you would come out of this video thinking. But the thing is, Tyler's audience does have an opinion. You can tell this by his comment section, what comments he likes, and what types of videos he makes. And by making a video that tries to neuter the real harm that both groups like Pegida and the AfD could commit, and by presenting this as some sort of both sides journalism, Tyler uncritically spreads these groups' racist messages and makes people feel like it's safer for them to agree. The best propaganda isn't the one telling you how to think, it's the one that's doing the thinking for you. And that's all I have to say. Sorry this video was made pretty rushed, but I have another video coming out kind of soon about the Utoya massacre. Anyway, I just wanted to put this out there so that people would have context to some of the lies that Tyler blatantly spreads in his videos. Thank you for watching, and Free Palestine.